So, chapter 4 introduces you to your ABC, activity-based costing. It's very popular costing method that's important to know about. There are 4 learning objectives. We are going to focus today on learning objective 1 as an introduction to it, and then we're going to get at it next time for sure. So we have more what we've learned about so far in the first couple of chapters of looking at cost systems. We've looked at very traditional cost systems. Both the job order cost system and the process cost system are traditional. And that's because oftentimes they allocate overhead based on a predetermined rate, whether it's based on labor or based on machine hours or something. That's basically how they allocate it. Your illustration here shows traditional way of allocating the overhead is just somewhat of a one stage or one step sort of process. Um, so if we did that with this particular company, Atlas Company, they produce 2 abdominal fitness products, the ab bench and the ab coaster. Of course, I've been on the ab roller coaster for a number of years because my ab keeps going up and up and up, never goes down. So we have here a look at direct material costs, which are shown as $40 for the bench, $30 for the coaster. Direct labor cost is $12 for each product per unit. And both products require 1 direct labor hour per unit. And so they allocate the overhead at that, $30 per hour of labor. And so if you did it the traditional way, you would see the ab bench would have a direct cost of $82 per unit. The ab coaster would only have a direct cost of $72 per unit. However, if you look more deeply at it, which is what ABC does, you'll see that this is totally incorrect way of looking at it, or not very accurate way of looking at it. Okay. So one of the things that's changed, well, the biggest thing that's changed is manufacturing has gone toward automation. Okay. There is much less need for labor. And the labor that they need are folks that understand how the robotics and machinery work, and not folks that are, putting parts into this or that or the other thing. That's the old way of doing it. This is all relatively new in the last 30, 40 years. It's accelerated. So basically speaking, using direct labor as a way to allocate overhead is just not a very, very good way of doing things anymore. Okay, because things have changed a lot. So the approach, activity-based costing, basically allocates overhead on things that take up the most activities, the most time involved in production. And so this is what you're going to be learning. Okay. So we look at activities within each of the cost pools, and that we have to identify what we call a cost driver, which is sort of the key component of an activity that's basically sucking up all the overhead in essence. And so we sort of allocate it based on that a little bit different. So some key concepts to remember, right? When you produce a product or perform a service, there's going to be a lot of events and actions and work and transactions that occur. Each of these are activities. We certainly need to understand that overhead is going to occur for certain activities, but then there are specific activities that really that have a very strong cause and effect relationship with how things should be allocated. And that's what you're going to learn about. Okay. Your book has these wonderful little graphs. Isn't this lovely? So, step by step here, identify and classify the activities that are involved to manufacture a product. And then you assign something called an overhead cost pool. Then you identify the main cost driver, which is basically sucking up most of the costs in these cost pools. Then you're going to learn how to compute what's called an activity-based overhead rate for each of these cost pools. And that's how we're going to allocate the costs. Okay. So you'll see this play out as the chapter goes on. No need to just stare at it too long. And you're, oh my God, I got to learn all that stuff. Well, not right now, but you will through the chapter. Okay. Um, it's basically a two-stage process. The first step is you have to look at activity cost pools because the overhead that we need is going to be assigned based on the cost pool. And then once that's assigned, we have to look at the cost drivers in these pools to know what's taking up most of the costs. Okay. So again, the more complex the product is and the product's manufacturing is, the more activities that are involved, and then the more cost drivers are likely to be identified. So thankfully, the book identifies a lot of them for you already, but it's just something for you to sort of get used to. So for example, when you look at these costs here, and this is um, on top of page 139, if you have the book with you here, this shows that in the purchasing department, which is a specific activity because you have to purchase raw materials and all this other stuff. The main cost driver there most of the time is being spent on producing those number of purchase orders because they need to buy a whole bunch of stuff. And so that would be a cost driver for that particular activity pool. Okay. The main cost driver. Obviously, there's other costs involved. That's the main one. Okay. And based on that, we allocate it to, well, how many purchase orders does it take to put together enough materials for the ab bench? And how much more or how much less were needed to put together those orders for the ab coaster? And look at it that way. Instead of just, traditionally, they would just split it equal, right? A little bit here, a little bit there. Well, maybe it just takes a lot more to do an ab coaster than an ab bench. And so shouldn't the cost be allocated there, is what ABC is saying. Storing a lot of stuff, square footage costs a ton of money. So what type of storage do you need for those raw materials and other things that you need to make to produce something? Well, maybe you don't need as much space for the ab bench parts and raw materials as you do the coaster. And so, you want to allocate it based on that. Right? When the production is running and machines are there producing things, how many hours are spent those machines are committed to producing this particular product versus that product. You should be allocating the cost based on the number of hours that product is devoted to working on a particular product. And of course, depending on the number of employees working on the line, you need to pay certainly for supervising. Oftentimes that is broken up by the number of employees that are being supervised. And so that would be, again, maybe you need less employees to put together an ab bench than you do an ab coaster. And so allocating the costs based on that makes a lot more sense in activity-based costing. And that's basically the introduction to it. This is the very quick, true false statements that are here. Traditional costing system allocates overhead by means of multiple overhead rates. No, it only uses one normally, right? A predetermined overhead rate or something like this, right? Activity-based costing allocates overhead in a two-stage process. Well, I think you probably read about that just a couple of slides ago, so that is also true. That's true. Direct materials and labor are easier to trace to products than overhead. Well, that's also very, very true. Um, and so that's one of the reasons why they wanted to put activity-based costing systems together, is to make overhead more accurate to trace, what's going where. As manufacturing processes have become more automated, more companies have chosen to allocate overhead on the basis of direct labor. No, labor has become less of a factor, and so they're actually getting away from that. They've actually been moving toward using, as you see, activities and cost drivers. In activity-based costing, an activity is an event, action, transaction, or work sequence that occurs when producing a product. Yeah, that's basically the definition. So that's true. Um, and so this is that next step that we're going to be going at here is this is a whole new system. You just were introduced to two traditional costing systems. Um, this one is a little bit more complex. There's a little bit more to it, a lot more numbers to it. And it looks a little bit deeper at allocating the overhead, to make it more as accurate as it can be. And you'll see we're still going to go back to that company that had the ab bench and the ab coaster, and you're going to see how that all kind of plays out. And you may be amazed by the end of the chapter just how different they are in costs. Questions?